Hey, um, maybe a couple of years ago I made a video on the Swedish prison system. So this video is going to be somewhat similar, except this time it's about Norway. Crime is something that I have pretty strong views on because I spent almost 2 years in a rough inner city area, and I had more than my fair share of abuse from yobs and from gangs. So I've just come across a video, and it's basically discussing the liberal prison system that is in place in Norway. So I want to just scrutinise this a little bit based on what I saw in the video and based on some other sources I've already seen. Now, what I noticed from this is that there's a huge amount of emphasis when the Norwegian model is compared to other parts of the world, especially the United States. There's a lot of emphasis put on the fact that Norway has very low crime rates, comparatively speaking, and low reoffending rates. Now, of course, that is something to be welcomed. Everyone wants to live in a safe society, and that in itself is a good thing. Okay, I wouldn't criticise that, obviously. So they're obviously doing something right. However, in my view, justice is not just about rehabilitation. It's not just about cutting reoffending rates. It's not just about assimilating criminals back into society. It should also be about fairness. Now, in my humble opinion, the Norwegian model is extremely unfair. Extremely unfair. I mean, I would honestly be interested in the view of people in Norway who have been a victim of serious crime. I'm not talking about petty crime, I'm talking about people who have been the victim of serious crime. I wonder what Norwegian women who may have been the victim of a rape would feel about their rapist. I'll talk about the system in a second based on the video I saw. But, well, actually it makes more sense to talk about that first, and I'll talk about the victim's perspective. So, based on this video, the inmates can wander around in this case it was an island, I believe. It did not look at all like a prison. Basically they're like little wood huts, and it's several inmates to a hut, to a lodge I guess you would call it. They have their own TV. They can exercise abundant space. They've got a lot more space than many people in developing countries, law-abiding citizens in many countries. They've all this fresh air. They've got their own TV. They can stick up posters. They can. It looks like they can pretty much live as normal a life as possible. The only catch is if they try to swim away from the island, they'll just be arrested and put back. But other than that, there is absolutely no signs whatsoever that they are living in any sort of detention whatsoever, or they are facing any sort of consequences for the crime they committed. Now, the guy in the video, the director, says the focus here is on caring for the inmates, and he actually said we had an axe murderer here once. In fact, I believe it was him personally who had been the victim, or his family had. I have to say, I find this sort of thinking very, very hard to understand. And to me, this is just another extreme. They often compare the Scandinavian system. I say Scandinavian because the Swedish system is quite similar. I'm not so familiar with the Danish and Finnish systems. Well, technically Finland's not part of Scandinavia. I'm not sure what the system is in Denmark. I haven't heard much about it, but I have heard a fair amount about the Swedish and Norwegian systems, and they're amongst the most liberal in the world. But basically the emphasis is on trying to make it as least like a prison as possible. Now, as I was watching this, I was thinking, a few years ago Norway had a tragic incident. Everyone knows about Anders Breivik, the far-right fanatic who killed 77 young people on Utøya Island. Now, I don't know what his specific accommodation is like, but in my opinion, if he is living in this sort of setup, I think that is morally repugnant. I don't understand how you can call this justice. I don't know how the Norwegians can call this justice, that people who in some cases have committed heinous crimes, whether it be rape or arson or first degree murder, I don't know how they treat paedophiles, these very serious crimes that destroy lives, and they're basically treating the inmates like they're in some sort of camp. It's pretty much no different, because in a camp they have rules, they have, but this is basically like a camp where there's a few rules, like, oh, don't go beyond the camp boundaries or something like that. I mean, I'll speak plainly, I think it's a joke. I really think. Now, of course, I've seen a lot of Scandinavians come on these videos and say, oh, but look, we have some of the lowest crime rates in the world. But what I would argue is, it shouldn't just be about crime levels. Yeah, that's great that you have low crime levels, but what about the victims? Really, how do victims of crime in countries like Norway and Sweden feel about this? I have seen some people, I have seen some Norwegians and Swedes really voice anger at this, but I don't know whether their views are suppressed or whether they're a minority. I don't know what it is, but I find it very hard to comprehend. As someone who has been through, has suffered from gangs, it would turn my stomach to see them basically being treated like they've done nothing wrong. I mean, okay, I'm not going to say the system's entirely bad. Clearly they're doing something right if there's a low offending rate, but the main thing I would like to put out here is fairness. Where is the fairness of this system? How can it be fair? Now, the director of the prison said, oh, we're all about giving people a second chance. But what about people who've committed a heinous crime? I mean, let me be clear here. I'm not talking about treating them in a barbaric way. And of course, there's other extremes in the world. I'm not talking about a Saudi-style system of amputating limbs and that sort of thing. And to make a comparison to a democratic country, I don't think the United States is a wonderful comparison. I think American prisons are overcrowded. America's one of the most violent democracies around. So America's not a good example. But to me, that's just the other extreme. The truth is, there's no perfect penal system in the world. There's no system in the world that can be called perfect. And I include the Scandinavian systems. When people hold them up as some sort of wonderful thing, I honestly think, well, wait a second. What about the victims? Where is the punishment here? How can you call this a just system if the criminal is basically being rewarded for their crime? They're being rewarded because they're not being punished. It's like nothing's happened. So in Norway, I can go out and rape a woman. I can violently assault an old person. I could burn down a house and people could be killed. And guess what? I'm going to be sent to an island for whatever the sentence is, 10 years. And basically live like it's some sort of holiday camp. That is, I'm sorry, but I think that is perverse. And are Scandinavians really such forgiving people? So maybe they are, I don't know. But my question really in this video is, this is directed at Scandinavian, specifically Norwegian and Swedish victims of crime, people who've been through serious crime. How do you feel about such a lenient system? Yes, it may reduce crime rates, but do you really think this is a fair system? What I would propose here is that whatever they're doing right in terms of cutting reoffending, maybe that's education in prison. Yeah, okay, keep that. But surely, to goodness, they should not be getting perks that law-abiding citizens have. They should not be able to walk around that almost like, it looks like a huge premises. They have a lot of space to wander around and basically just do what they want. I mean, the guy said, we had an axe killer in here and we let him go out and have an axe and cut down trees. Now, I would like to see the actual statistics on this, but does that mean you're going to allow a rapist access to porn? Do you know what I mean? There's something obviously very, very unfair about this system, and I find it very hard to comprehend. So my question here is for Norwegians or Swedes, if you've been a victim of crime, and by the way, I'm not trying to offend your countries, this isn't about being anti-Norwegian or anti-Swedish, I just have a very big on ease with your penal system. And I hope I'm never a victim of crime in Norway or Sweden. Yeah, I know you have low crime rates, but it doesn't mean that crime doesn't happen. And if I was a tourist and I was mugged, and I found out that the offender, nothing happened, I'd be furious. If I had a girlfriend and she was raped, and I found out the offender was walking around like that, I would... Now, I'm not proposing an American-style system, I think that's the other extreme, but surely there has to be some sort of middle ground which embodies all those things. It focuses on rehabilitation, it focuses on education, it's not brutal, it's not inhumane, it respects human rights, but at the same time it is tough. It makes the criminal pay for what they have done, because that is fair. It's not about sounding tough, it's about fairness. Now, in my opinion, what I would conclude with is, because the Scandinavian ideology focuses only on rehabilitation, doesn't focus on justice. No one can say there is justice in this system, because there blatantly isn't. So, you know, frankly, when people talk about Norway and Sweden being paradise, I question that, because it's things like this that really... it's extreme liberalism. How can that be fair?